Hello, Pat.
Hello, Helen.
Could you just tell me a little bit about your background in Aston?
Well, I was born in Aston and lived there all of my life till we moved to Chelmsley. It was just a normal sort of school. It really was back-to-back houses. I suppose it was very poor, but I don't think any of us felt that because we were all in a community. We all looked after each other, and then really, when I was 8, the war started. So, of course, it was a very different story then, because it was like, people were out on the patrols looking for, in case bombs went off. We didn't get bombed in any way, but of course it was all around us. So it was quite frightening. And we didn't get the food, and we never got the education really, because we had to go, we'd do schooling in the morning, and then we'd go to different people's houses in the afternoon to rest, because you had to, because at night, it was, as I say, it was wartime. So it wasn't an easy childhood in that sense of what was going on around. We never had any sort of swimming lessons, when you see the kids now just wandering off swimming. We never did, because in case the air raid came on. So it was very limited, our education really. I left school when I was 14 and went straight to work, and worked, used to have to be in at sort of 7:30, 8 o'clock, and there was no messing about, there was no free time. You went to work because there was nothing that you could pick up in money if you didn't work. So yeah, that was basically what my childhood was.
Just going back a little bit to your school days, could you tell me a little bit about a typical school? You said it was just the morning.
Yes.
But about a typical school day for you, what would you do?
Well, we do the usual. We didn't have different teachers, or obviously the whole thing went round. There was one teacher for the whole school really. And the kids today, I don't know what they'd do, but he had to go in the RAF, actually, his name. We used to call him Daddy Eastwood. And if you played up in any way, Daddy Eastwood would throw the rubber back, with the, what he wiped the board with, he would just throw that at you, and that'd be the end of that. So today the kids would die, wouldn't they? But that was how it was. There was discipline in the schools, but it was very basic. You just learned the, arithmetic, English, and cookery and whatever. But it was, as I say, very limited really to what we did, what we would do, what the kids would do now, even in a normal school.
Could you just tell me, for the recording purposes, which school it was you went to?
Burlington Street.
Thank you. So thinking about home life now as a child,
yes.
Could you tell me a little bit about what the house was like that you lived in?
Yeah, it was a living room and a front room, and actually 3 bedrooms, but the one was sort of a box room. It was a yard, and then opposite, you just went up the yard, and then next over the wall was another yard, and so your neighbours were very, very close. You were on top of each other almost, but that was good, because you all, as I say, because of the situation, you looked after each other. So everybody knew what everybody else was doing, really. There was no locking your doors like you do now. You sort of shut yourselves away almost. So that never did happen. It was a little street I lived in. It was a cul-de-sac. So obviously we knew everybody in the street. We all had our own entry and whatever. But yeah, that was the situation of the house. There was no bathroom. It was just a kitchen where you had the tin bath to, and have a bath and then swill everywhere afterwards. But that was it basically, yeah. There was no washing machine, so you lit the boiler on a Saturday and did the whole of the washing, the sheets and such. Yeah. So I suppose we never thought it was hard, but I suppose looking back, it was. But I never found it so.
Could you tell me about who lived in the house with you? Who were you with?
There was just my mum and myself, and then my granddad got bombed out, and he came and lived with us. So we had my granddad living with us after they got bombed. Well, he lived alone, and so he came and lived with us when he got bombed out. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thinking still as a child, you went to school during the day, but what did you do with your spare time?
Well, I was involved in the church. I never really wanted to go, but it was somewhere to go, and I think because Mum worked every day, I think Sunday was a means of her doing the housework. So most of the kids went to Sunday school, and at the end of it, if you were lucky, you'd get a biscuit if they could get any off the ration. So one of the reasons was, ended up with what you got. But that was the life, and I was in the Brownies and Girl Guides for a time, but I soon dropped out of that. It wasn't really for me. But that was what we did, There were Sunday school activities and such like. I wasn't a regular... Well, I suppose I was, but it wasn't sort of what I wanted to do. But it was an easy option, really. Yeah.
So while you were in the house as a child with your mum, did you have any regular chores that you had to do? What kind of things did you do around the house?
Oh, I used to have to do an awful lot, really, because my mum went to work, and she worked in a factory, and she went out at 7:30. So I was left to do an awful lot, really. Yeah.
Can you tell me a bit about what you had to do?
Well, we used to have to, because we'd got no carpet, obviously. It was my responsibility for scrubbing the floors and lighting the boiler on a Saturday, which was a nightmare because I could never get the damn thing to light. But yeah, and so generally, we used to have to. And funnily enough, I don't know, because my mum, we were poor, really. But my mum was very clean, and she used to have, on a Wednesday, I remember it now ever so distinctly, I used to have to brasso all the knives and forks and then wash them. And anything brass would have to be cleaned every week, and that was my job as well. And but it seems ridiculous now when we had nothing, but that was, I suppose, pride in her home, really. Yeah.
Thank you. So you said you left school at 14.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a bit about your first job?
Well, yes, my auntie was a cleaner at the GEC, and she worked in the WMI, cleaning the offices in the WMI, and she got me a job in the office at the and my mother was so proud. She told everybody I was an office girl. But that's what I did. And then I went off. Then I went into the dispatch office, which was great. It was great fun. They used to have parcels, and big parcels, and the lorries used to come in, and it was good. That was really good, and that's where I met my husband. Yeah.
Would you want to tell us a bit about that, about meeting Jimmy?
Yeah, well, he came out of the army. He'd been abroad. He was in Burma. So you can imagine him coming out of Burma, how he looked and I thought, oh, this is okay. And so, yes, that's how I met him.
Was it love at first sight?
Oh, it was then, because, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, he was very tanned and...
Could you tell me a little bit about how long you were with Jimmy before you married, and then having the children and stuff? A bit about the family early on.
Yeah. I was with Jimmy, I think for a couple of years, and I went, my mum died, and so I went and lived with Jimmy's mum and dad, who really looked after me. His dad was just wonderful. He'd lost his first wife, so he knew what I was going through, really. So yes, and then we decided we'd get married, which we did. And I'd kept on the house. It was a rented property, and they were landlords in those days that knew you from birth almost. So it was very funny because the landlord wouldn't put Jimmy's name on the rent book in case he played up or anything like that. So he just put my name on it, that I'd always have a home. And then first had a miscarriage with the first baby, and then I had 2 sons.
Can you tell me a bit about the time when, around moving, did you have the boys in Aston?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Tell me a bit about that time then, when how old they were and that kind of thing when you were moving out.
Oh gosh, I think they were at senior school. I can't quite remember how old they were. Oh. Anyway, yeah. Well, what happened? The houses, they started to redevelop the area, and the houses were being knocked down. So we had an option of going to Druids Heath or here, Chelmsley Wood. And we chose Chelmsley Wood. And these houses were brand new, obviously. And we were Area 1. It was in 13 areas in those days. And we were Area 1. We were first people to move up here, really. And in the end, I wanted to leave Aston because because of it being so old and everything like that, we were being overrun with mice and things like that, which terrified me. So I was, really happy to, in one way, to be leaving that situation, but very sad because the whole situation moved. None of the neighbours were the same. We were all. It was just sort of wire fencing then. You weren't allowed, in effect, to put fencing up. It was just all wire fencing round here. So everybody, again, in the same sort of way, we were overlooked. It wasn't as it is now. We were just overlooked with just wire fencing and a sort of a walkway, and that was it, really. But things have altered, obviously, over the years here. Yeah.
Can you tell me a bit about how you felt about when you were moving into Chelmsley Wood? How did you feel about the new area and new house?
The house was amazing because it was enormous to me. Obviously it isn't, but it was to me. And to have the bathroom facilities, the house itself, I just couldn't believe when I walked into this empty room, and it was so big in comparison with the where we'd left. But I was very sad, and I hated it really. I wasn't happy. I wasn't happy really. We'd got to move. We had no option. We just had to move because of, as I say, all the houses being knocked down. But I certainly didn't come up here and was happy. It's taken a long time.
Can you tell me a little bit about your very first impressions of Chelmsley Wood?
I felt it was very cold. There was nothing here to... there was nothing about it that made me happy, I don't think, really. I think there was very little to we were all strangers, and that took time. The 2 lads were in senior school, so you didn't have to take them to school. They went to school in Chardin, so they certainly didn't want me taking them to school. So there was no connection. I went to work, and sort of happy to go to work, really. Yeah.
Can you tell me a bit about the work that you were doing when you moved to Chelmsford?
I was working at the post office, letter sorting. So it was a long way to go, because the buses weren't like they are now. There were Midland Red buses when we first all moved up here. So you can imagine there was one bus every whenever. So it was a heck of a journey, and the same coming home. And I worked in the evening, so sometimes it was nearly, when we were on the late shift, it was nearly 11 o'clock when I got back home, because you used to have to do a 6-week rota shift.
So it wasn't working in Chelmsford, was it?
No.
Whereabouts were you working?
At the GPO in Hill Street then it was. It's not now, but it was in Hill Street then.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about the people that you got to know eventually, the neighbours, and maybe through work and other things?
Well, what happened then, I worked at the GPO for quite some time, and then my nerves went to pot. I don't know why, or I don't know how. And I had to give the GPO up. But I needed to work, because I needed to go out. It wasn't even the money then, I needed to go. So at Roundmead, which was the old folks' home, there was a job as a cleaner. And my friend at the end of the block there, she asked me if I'd like to apply for it, and I did. And I went and cleaned at Roundmead. And I was there for about 2.5 years, I suppose. So I got to know everybody, and got to know my friend Vicky, who was great fun. And we became really, really good friends. And then Mr. Robson, who was the deputy warden there, said, look, I don't think you should be cleaning. We're opening a new place for teenagers at Craigcroft. Would you like to go? But not as a cleaner. And I said I would love to go. And so I started at Craigcroft again, which is different, totally different now. The building's still there, but it's totally different. And I used to have a whale of a time there, because the kids were just dreadful, but such fun.
Any interesting stories?
Well, yes, the one lad took all the sheets from the linen cupboard and went round selling them. And if they didn't want to get, I'm not going to swear, if they didn't want to get off, they told you what to do, because they didn't have to get. And I remember one, can I swear?
Yes, of course.
But we had one girl there, and she was dreadful. And anyway, she had to go to the doctors. Well, you had to accompany the person, the girl. So I went over, and it was Dr. Pomeroy. So she said, I'm going to jump off that effing tower block. And he said, well, effing well, go and do it then. I can't do it. And I just was sat there, and but it was great. We used to run. You'd heard some stories from Chris. Jimmy went up and used to be on the door, and a very good friend. He was, when they used to have the fruit shop. They had the fruit shop at Craigcroft, and John Harrison worked there, and used to run a disco. And John was an innocent, and he used to just be a kid in the vegetable shop, and used to get his little records, discs or whatever, and the kids were passing them through and selling them. So, but it turned out great. It turned out, and we built up a good relationship. And then they asked me I could have gone to college, which I would have loved. I used to have to do occasional sleep-ins, but then Jimmy got sick, and I just have to give it up. But I would have gone on there because I loved it. Yeah. And then while Jimmy was ill, I saw an advert for a doctor's receptionist and thought, oh, that'd be okay. And that was in Borsall Heath, and that's where I retired. Yeah, so it's been a bit of a mixed life.
I know you've been heavily involved in Chelmsford Baptist Church. Can you tell me how that began and the early days of that?
Yeah, well, what happened there, my brother-in-law lived in a place called From Then Now, and near Bristol, between Bristol and Bath. And he'd lived there right from when he left the army. He divorced and then went down there. And he got very sick and used to live in a council house opposite a church. And we used to go down, he was in Bath United Hospital. And so we used to go down once a month. That's all we could do because both working. And I used to go into the church. Just sometimes it was always open and you could just go, and sometimes I used to go to the service in the morning and then to the hospital and then home. And when I came home, I needed to go to church again. And I'd always gone to a Baptist church as a child, and I knew where this church was, and I needed to go to church. And so I said to Jimmy, I want to go to church, and I said, we'll go to Craycroft because it's a Baptist church. And we walked in, and it was, well, as on, a Baptist church, and it was just all chairs and whatever. And Jimmy said, whatever have you brought us to? Because it was nothing like he'd been in the army and been in the fire service. He liked it orderly, and it was just all over them. But it was the place where God had put me because of what happened afterwards. Jimmy had a stroke and he died in Stratford Hospital. So I was on my own really, and then Dorothy and Stuart Greenbank took me under their wing, and really the rest is history. I've been there ever since. So that's been 27 years.
Do you have any interesting stories about the early days in the Baptist church?
Well, I'm a deacon of the church now, and when I first was made a deacon, I thought we were at war. It was just unbelievable. It really was, the problems really. And there were, obviously there's been one or two things, that have gone on. It's been a journey. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
Okay. How do you feel about Chelmsford Wood now? Now you've been here all these years.
Yes.
How do you feel about it?
Well, I feel it's home now. I mean, if Jimmy would have lived, we would have moved. But as it was, I've stayed here, and it is home now. And of course the church and everything surrounding it really. It's been my sort of salvation really, because it's not just been Chris's divorce was an absolute shock of my life, and that happened just after Jimmy died, and that really shook me rigid because I'd got on so well with Diane. She was like a daughter. We still see each other now. That hasn't stopped altogether. But yeah, so it's been a bit of a that particular time was such a rough ride. But in between that, I got baptised. So yeah.
Could you tell me a bit about the story of the present minister coming to Chelmsford Wood?
Yes, yeah. Well, we'd had Andy Bruce when I first started, and then we had a young woman, Hilary, and she well, it nearly collapsed the church, really, because she sort of went Emmanuel way, you know, and she brought people in they'd been sent by God and all this business. Anyway, I think Hillary got the sack, and that was that. So we then had Malcolm for a short time, and then Malcolm left, and we were down. We'd got nobody really, and we were down to 13 people, and Dorothy looked at me and said, this church will close. There's 13 of us, and we were both in tears. And then it used to be an area superintendent, not as it is now. It was Neil Hall, and he came and he said there are 6 people interested. He said they live in 2 houses, and they're willing to come for nothing really. And we were a bit sort of, you know, what sort of thing is it when they want to come like this? And we were afraid of them, and Sarah tells me she was afraid of us. So it was quite a journey, and I was the secretary then even, and two people appeared, one in a long overcoat and one with a bandana and ripped jeans. So you know which one that was. And I opened the door, and there were these 2, and it was the ministers. And then we met up with Dorothy, and I had to meet with Alan, who is a solicitor, and he frightened us to death. We just could not make Alan out at all, and he frightened us to death, and Dorothy and I were just scared stiff. But we were down to 13 people, and for quite a while the 6 funded and kept the church going. We had no money really, and the minister's been with us for 20 years next year, and his wife. And we've watched the children be born and become lovely girls.
Well, thank you, Pat. That was a lovely interview. I do appreciate
I hope it was.
And